Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the webinar between North American Young Generation and Nuclear and the Nuclear Institute Young Generation Network, and it's all about fusion. So it's going to be some interesting perspectives here from North America and also from the UK. So I'll introduce myself and our organization. I'll turn it over to Sarah to do the same. We'll start out with Ryan from North America, and then Sarah will turn it over to Hermione from the UK. If you have questions during this session, just throw them into chat here. We'll answer them after the presentations. So the way this is going to go is Ryan will do his. It'll be about 15 to 20 minutes, a presentation, what's happening in North America. It'll then go over to Hermione for the same thing for the UK, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end to get to your questions. And it'll be a moderated kind of panel session so we can turn it back and forth. So my name is Matthew Marger. I'm the Vice President of North American Young Generation and Nuclear. And for those that don't know, it's a organization, it's a nonprofit. We have 120 chapters, 15,000 members all across North America. And really, it's just to empower the young generation of nuclear professionals. Sarah, did you want to talk about yourself and NI-YGN?
Thanks, Matt. So I'm Sarah Janema. I am the vice chair for one of the vice chairs for the Nuclear Institute Young Generation Nuclear at Young Generation Network in the UK. The YGN, as we call ourselves in the UK, is part of the Nuclear Institute, which is a professional body for nuclear professionals in the UK. The Young Generation Network's been in existence for about 20 years, and we have around 1,200 members. And they're all kind of working on promoting the work that we do within the nuclear industry through communication, collaboration, and professional development and around the world. So it's really great to be part of this international collaboration with North America.
Okay, and without further ado, I will introduce Ryan. So Ryan Nora is a design physicist at the Inertial Confinement Fusion Program at Lawrence Livermore National Labs. He graduated from Colorado School of Mines in 2008 and earned his PhD in plasma physics in 2015 from the University of Rochester. He joined Lawrence Livermore National Labs as a postdoc shortly after and converted to staff in 2017. He stimulates ICF implosions and designs a target with and laser drive for experiments on the National Ignitions facility. He also focuses on data science and uses machine learning to predict the outcome of future experiments. Ryan has a passion to bring fusion energy to the grid, but in his spare time likes to play board games and also likes to go hiking. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ryan for his presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. I hope you guys can see and hear me. Start this up. All right.
Yeah, we can see it and we can hear it. You're good to go.
Great. Well, thank you, Matthew. And I'm glad to be speaking to you guys today, especially on behalf of Lawrence Livermore National Labs and all of the ICF teams that have been working on this work, both nationally and internationally. So I'm going to give you an overview and perspective of fusion ignition at the National Ignition Facility, and over our recent achievement and kind of some next steps on what's going to happen for fusion energy. So we got ignition, hurrah. On December 5th, 2022 was a significant advancement in ICF research where we've basically shown that there's nothing fundamentally limiting us from getting gains greater than 1 in a controlled laboratory experiment, which opens a pathway towards inertial fusion energy. And so for 90th trillionths of a second, we were able to produce more than 30 quadrillion watts. It's just twice the pressure of the sun and 5 times the temperature of the center of the sun. And so we were able to release about 3.1 megajoules of fusion energy in that time. And so it's a significant advancement over anything that we've done before. And despite the fact that it's not exactly the same amount of energy that we put into the system in terms of wall plug efficiency, the National Ignition Facility is not a fusion energy plant. And so this is the first time that we've proven that we can do it. And now it's just an effort to make sure that it can be done at a larger and economical scale. So I'm going to give you a quick outline of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to describe the similarities and differences between fission and fusion. I'll talk about inertial confinement fusion, the National Ignition Facility, and then maybe a few slides on achieving ignition, and finally some next steps towards inertial fusion energy. So fusion and fission both release energy. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. I think you are all probably aware of fission, where you start with some large massive particle and you break it apart into multiple pieces, and that releases energy. Fusion is the opposite direction, where we start with smaller particles and then fuse them together into a larger one, and then this also releases energy. So anytime you fizz for a particle that's larger than iron 56, you're going to release energy. And anytime you fuse for anything smaller than iron 56, you'll also release energy. So our typical fuel is deuterium and tritium, and the reaction that we have is deuterium plus tritium is going to fuse together to form an alpha particle, or a helium-4, and a neutron, which carries most of the energy. So fusion fuel itself is powerful and can also be quite expensive sometimes. So 1 pound of natural uranium has the same energy output as 42 barrels of crude oil, or 8 tons of coal, or 2.4 grams of deuterium and tritium. And it turns out that tritium is quite expensive. It's about $30,000 per gram right now. And so this means that our fusion power plants are going to have to breed their own tritium. And but once they do that, then deuterium is pretty much dirt cheap. You can pull it just out of the ocean. And so it should be, pennies on the dollar to make this kind of fuel work. So I want to give you a few examples of traditional approaches to fusion energy. I hope everyone's familiar with the sun. That uses gravity to confine a large mass of, or a mass of plasma to keep it hot and dense enough to get fusion reactions occurring. It's kind of hard to do that on Earth, though, because we don't have that much gravity. And so we're going to use alternate methods to do this. Magnetic confinement is one such approach. And I think our next speaker is going to be talking more about that. But these are fusion devices that are tokamaks, typically some devices that you might have heard of in the news, or ITER, or JET, or D3D. There are lots of them out there. I'm going to talk more about inertial confinement fusion, which is shown here on the right, where we're using lasers to basically compress and implode a capsule, and then we're going to use the inertia of this imploding capsule to confine our hot, dense plasma to make fusion possible. Example of facilities for this is NIF, or LMJ, which is in France, or even GECCO, which is in Japan. There are lots of different places, and I just wanted to give you a few examples. So more about laser indirect drive inertial confinement fusion. It's going to use a laser-driven hohlraum to create X-rays that then drive the implosion. So it's kind of a two-step process. So here on the left, we can see a gold hohlraum can. Oh, let me see if I can. Oh, no, don't know how to get that. Okay, we have a cylinder that's basically made of gold, and it has two holes on either end, and we shine the lasers through these small holes. And then laser then impacts the gold wall. And once the gold wall starts to heat up, it's going to convert that light into X-rays. And so we create a nice little X-ray bath for our capsule, which is in the middle, which is this tiny spherical shell that's in the center of our hohlraum. This then absorbs all of these X-rays and the outer layers get hot and they start to ablate outwards, which then pushes everything inwards. And so our capsule then starts to accelerate inwards and ramp up in amount of pressure and temperature and density. And eventually we reach fuel core pressures of about 500 billion atmospheres or so if we've done it correctly. And if we've done it really well, then eventually fusion ignition is achieved and we send a burn wave that propagates outwards and hopefully releases more energy than the amount of energy we put into the system to begin with. So the basic line, or the bottom line, is that achieving these conditions for ignition demands precise control of our design, our lasers, and of the target parameters themselves. So it's quite difficult, and we've only just recently achieved, break even, perhaps. Okay, here's a picture of the National Ignition Facility. We call it the NIF, and this was taken sometime in July or August or so, because you can tell all the hills in the background are dead and yellow and brown. It's a nice place to come visit, and we do give tours. So if you would like to see it, and you're in the neighborhood, see if you can stop on by. So NIF itself is the world's most energetic laser, and it's about the size of 3 football fields in length, just kind of stacked next to each other. It's comprised of 192 laser beams, and about 2 megajoules of laser energy are used. And so the main oscillator room starts it all is kind of in the middle of the facility, and then it propagates towards the back, and then out towards these laser bays and these long things on either side. And so it's going to bounce back and forth there, getting more and more energy until it's ready to be delivered on target. Then it's going to be flipped into the switch yard, which then comes through this complicated array of optics, and then finally into the target chamber, which is shown in this sphere here on the bottom right in the middle picture, and then also on the far right as this blue vacuum chamber. And it's about 10 meters in diameter. From there, in the very center of that, the lasers are directed to the center where we have our hull ROM, which I described on the previous slide. That's about 1 centimeter in length. And in the very middle of that, we have our target, which is basically a small balloon, if you will, made out of plastic or diamond or beryllium or boron carbide. And containing within this small balloon is our DT gas. And so during our implosion, during the experiment, this gets compressed down by a factor of 30 or so to about half the size of a human hair. And so we have this huge facility with a huge amount of energy, and it's being focused into a very, very tiny portion in space. And that's what allows us to get fusion ignition. The targets themselves, I would say, are engineering marvels. Here again is another close-up of our gold hull ROM. This time it's a real picture of one. And in the middle of that hull ROM, we have our capsule. And the way that we hold it there is through these small membranes that are tens of nanometers thin, I would say. And if we look through the top of our gold hull ROM, we have the picture on the right, which is kind of what our capsule looks like as it's sitting there inside of our hull ROM. Going from the outside radially towards the inside, this capsule is made out of concentric layers of different types of materials. The first one being our ablator material, and in this case, it is going to be a diamond ablator. And then it's slowly doped with tungsten at some point, so it gets that dark band that you see. That's here. And then inside of that, we have a deuterium and tritium ice. So it's frozen hydrogen. And then in the very middle is mostly just DT gas. And so we start out with this diamond sphere that we then have to drill a small hole and then poke a very small fill tube in, which is about 2 to 5 microns in diameter. So it's extremely small. And if you can barely see it out on the bottom part of this picture and also in the enlarged inset here. And through that tube, we basically fill the interior with our hydrogen gas, our DT, and then we cool it to cryogenic temperatures so that it freezes on the walls. And so that's basically our whole target. We put this onto the end of a long arm, which is shown in the bottom left here again. Here's our hull ROM, and we stick this into the middle of our target chamber, and then we shoot the laser at it, and then we do our experiment. Afterwards, though, the hull ROM is completely destroyed. There's nothing left, and we just have this damaged arm that remains. All right, so diagnostics are essential in understanding where we are and what problems need fixing, and they have significantly improved over time. And I don't have a lot of time today to talk to you about the details of this, of what we do and all the work that's gone into it, but suffice to say that we are looking at the neutrons that come out and the X-rays that come out from these experiments in order to figure out what's going on and what's going wrong. Also, that this is the best diagnosed HED plasma on the planet, and this has been developed by the entire community over decades of work. Hundreds of thousands of people, well, hundreds of people for thousands of hours have been working on this to try and get it to where we are. And so we couldn't be there without the support of everyone. Our program also uses a combination of theory, simulation, and experiment in progressing towards ignition and high yield. And again, there's too much detail here for the time today to tell you all of the things that we've done. But we have been making steady progress because now we've achieved ignition. I do simulations on these hydrodynamic simulations and of these implosions. And so I kind of wanted to highlight a little bit about that. And so in the middle here are 3 different simulations we have of 3 different implosions over different years. And you can see that as they go from the bottom left, which is the earliest stuff that we've done, towards the top right, things have been getting more and more spherical. And so this is good because then that means that we're improving our implosions and we're getting better performance. So let's focus in on this middle one here. So I have a nice little animation for you. This is an animation of our 3D hydrodynamic simulation of experiment 120321, which was 2012 in March, I believe. Yeah, January, February, March. And here on the left, you can see the density isocontours. And this is at the time of peak neutron production. And we're kind of spinning around the target as it's spinning around. In the middle the middle panel and the right-hand panel are different types of X-ray energies that we're looking at as they're escaping the problem. And so what we see here is that instead of having a perfect sphere where everything is nice and compact, we have all these perturbations and bumps and wiggles. These cause us to not get ignition, and so they're bad. We can identify a few of these guys, like for instance, this little cone here on the top. That's basically the tent scar. So that small 10 nanometer thin tent that's holding the capsule inside of the holon, that's causing this perturbation, which then allows a lot of these X-rays to leak out of our problem and prevent us from getting ignition. This giant spike that you see that's kind of rotating around, that's the remnants of the fill tube. And so that also not only lets energy escape, but also injects mass into the center of our hotspot, cooling it and preventing us from getting ignition. So there's a lot of cool stuff that's happening. And hopefully we can get it to be hotter and hotter and more spherical as time goes on. Okay, so we've did a lot of work and we achieved ignition by our standards in the year 2021. But this wasn't good enough for the Academy of Sciences, and so they wanted something that was more energy than what we put in via the laser. And so we achieved that in December of last year, just by including an extra 150 kilojoules of laser energy. And so now we've basically achieved ignition. And this is a fantastic result, which then has implications for the future. Because in the event that ignition is achieved, we're going to have to build a separate IFE research effort to advance the prospect of fusion energy for putting it onto the grid. So the NNSA, or the National Nuclear Security Administration, who is our primary funder, doesn't really have an energy mission. And so in the event that we basically get ignition, they're going to want to continue on with their high yield aspect, while we're also going to be wanting to do our fusion energy. But those two aren't compatible. And so the government is looking towards private-public partnerships in order to advance the field of fusion energy to make IFE power plants economical. Now, the economics of the power plants is basically setting the fundamental constraints on the targets and implosions that we have to perform. So if we have a 2 megajoule laser, for instance, and we're going to be required to have a gain of 100, and we're going to have to shoot that 10 times a second or at 10 hertz in order to make it economic. And so the engineering challenge of making this possible is enormous. I can't underestimate this enough. The target is going to have to be cheap and robust, and they're just going to have to, a lot of effort is going to have to be put into making sure that all the technology exists. Now, the good thing is that there are many fusion energy approaches or institutions that are working on these problems, and the field has been invigorated by our proof of concept of fusion gain. And so here I've listed just a few of them, and they're attracting a lot of attention in terms of venture capital, and also, attention in the press, saying that they can get fusion ignition and put energy on the grid. I don't think all of these are going to work, but hopefully one or two of them do work, and it's important that we make sure that they can function such that we can get fusion energy to be a real life thing. Okay, so I'll leave with this historical quote here, that there's a historical milestone in the fact that our Apollo 11 landing on the moon took place a mere 66 years after the Wright brothers' first flight, and this was by Buzz Aldrin. We kind of consider this ignition our own Wright brothers moment, and who knows what's going to happen in the next 66 years. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Over to Sarah.
Thanks, Ryan. So I would just like to introduce you to Hermione. So Hermione's been with the UK Atomic Energy Authority, the UKEA, for 4 years, joining as a master's student originally in the Hydrogen-3 Advanced Technology Department, researching interactions between fusion, fuel tritium, and various fusion-relevant materials to aid fuel cycle design. Hermione then joined the UKEA graduate scheme, carrying out placements across the organisation, including as a diagnostic physicist analysing data from JET, a systems engineer for STEP, and experience in a safety case and the Office for Chief Engineer. Since finishing the graduate scheme, Hermione has been involved in robotic applications, engineering, as well as outreach work, providing tours of the UKA facility. Hermione is currently a systems integration engineer with the Remote Applications in Challenging Environments, or RACE department at UKA. So Hermione, I'll pass it over to you to give an overview on fusion in the UK and the work that's carried out at UKA.
Great, thank you very much. Share my screen.
Yeah, we can see that.
Brilliant. Okay, so yeah, as Sarah just mentioned, I'm Hermione and I'm a systems integration engineer at the UK AEA, which is our government fusion research facility. And I'm going to give you a very whistle-stop tour through fusion research in the UK. So as you've already obviously had a little brief overview of what fusion is, I won't stick on this slide too long, but basically replicating the process in the sun, we're taking two small nuclei, fusing them together with the hope of getting energy out the other side. And our fuel of choice tends to be deuterium and tritium, so that is hydrogen 2 and hydrogen 3, as these have the best kind of probability of reaction and energy density out the other side. And unlike most of the American approach, we tend to focus on magnetic confinement fusion. So we are taking our fuel, we are putting a lot of energy into it to excite it into a plasma state. And then we are using a device called a tokamak to accelerate this plasma in a effectively donut shape using a pair or two different types of magnets. So we've got our toroidal magnets, which are these D-shaped ones that go around the plasma, and then also these grey rings, which are our poloidal magnets. And together these shape and confine our plasma into this donut shape. So a little bit about UKAEA. So yeah, we're the government's fusion research facility, and we are based just a little bit south of Oxford, so in the kind of central south of the UK. And we also have a secondary facility, our fusion technology facility, up in Yorkshire, so a bit further north in the country. And just a little aerial view of our site. We're actually based on an old airbase in the middle of nowhere in Oxfordshire, so surrounded by lots of lovely fields. And then our other facility is a big work hall up in Yorkshire. So on our site, we actually have two different reactors. So we have our JET reactor, which is the Joint European Torus, which is a conventional donut-shaped tokamak run by us on behalf of the Eurofusion, which is the European Union's fusion cluster. And we also have Master Upgrade, which is a slightly different type of tokamak, which is a spherical tokamak, so squishing our plasma more into a ball shape. And I'm going to give you a bit more information on both of these in a minute. And then also on site, we have a lot of subsidiary fusion research going on. So based on our experience with these two different tokamaks and also a series of much smaller tokamaks over time. So our site has been operational since the mid 1960s. With a lot of small fusion reactors building up to these two. And over that time, we've developed some really strong capabilities on different aspects of magnetic confinement fusion. So part of this is our RACE department, which is Robotic Applications in Challenging Environments. And this is remote handling devices for maintenance, upgrades, and eventually decommissioning of fusion reactors. So this is spun out of the fact that we have remote handling capabilities on JET with our one remote handling device called Mascot, which has been used for various upgrades over the years. JET's been operational since the 1980s. We also have our materials research facility. So this is looking at analysis and handling of radioactive materials and also fusion relevant materials. So for fusion, we need materials which can cope with high neutron flux, high heats, and high magnetic fields, which has quite a lot of load on different materials. So we've got a facility designed for looking into these. And we have our Hydrogen-3 Advanced Technologies facility, which is looking into our tritium fuel. So JET is actually one of, or currently the only magnetic confinement reactor that works with a combined deuterium-tritium fuel. And so having operated this since the 1980s, we've developed quite a good capability for handling tritium, and it's a fairly niche experience. So we've developed this into our Hydrogen-3 research facility designing fuel cycles for future reactors. As well as this, we have quite a focus on trying to upskill and train the future generation for fusion. Obviously, it needs to be an ongoing process. So we have our Oxfordshire Advanced Skills Apprenticeship College on site as part of training the workforce. So a little bit more about JET. So this is our main reactor on site at the moment, and it's a conventional tokamak which was commissioned in the early 80s, and since then it's gone through a number of upgrades. So this is a picture of the inside of our reactor vessel. Our plasma actually is this lovely pink colour. That's our real optical image. And we've got a number of features on it, but largely, so the fuel is heated via 3 main heating methods. We've got our ohmic heating, so accelerating the plasma around creates a resistance like running a charge through a wire, and that heats up the gas. We have microwave heating, so putting in microwaves at a resonant frequency with the plasma to provide energy, and also neutral beam injection heating, so firing in neutral particles to collide with our plasma and convert kinetic energy into plasma energy. And with the combination of these, we can get the plasma into jet up to 150 million degrees Celsius, which is actually 10 times hotter than the sun. And this is how we achieve our fusion energy, by spinning around our gas at a very high energy until it collides. And jet over the years has held a number of records until, as Ryan was talking about, NIF overtook us. We had the record for Q factor, which we've held since 1997 until last year. And so Q factor is the ratio of energy put into a fusion reaction versus the energy out. And we had a Q factor of 0.67, so about 2/3 of the energy we put in to put out. And this is largely limited by the size of our reactor. So as we scale up the reactor, we would get more energy out. And we still actually hold the record for the amount of energy out of a fusion reaction. And JET, as I mentioned, has been operating since the early 80s, so it's actually coming to the end of its life at the end of this year. We have a few more experimental campaigns to go, and then we're moving into a decommissioning period. So we're going to look at how to properly take apart the tokamak, which one of this size and scale has never been done before. So it's going to be a really exciting challenge to learn and develop capabilities for doing this. So I mentioned a little bit about our JET fusion record. So this was in December 2021. We actually previously held the record for getting 22 megajoules of energy out of a fusion reaction, and this was in our first deuterium-tritium campaign back in 1997. And that stayed as the record until December 2021, where we managed to get out a pulse of energy, which was about 59 megajoules, which was approximately 10 megawatts sustained over 6 seconds. So fusion, especially magnetic confinement fusion, is inherently a pulsed reaction. So we add a lot of energy, we excite it into a plasma, that spins around for a while, and then it all de-excites and we start over again. And at the moment, we're time limited by the temperature of our magnets. So as we pulse, we have pulses for about 20 seconds because our magnets overheat. And actually, there's a lot of research going into things like high temperature superconducting magnets, which will actually really advance how long our pulse lengths can go for, and therefore how much energy we're going to get out. Some very exciting research. The other reactor we have on site is our mast upgrade, which is a mega amp spherical tokamak. So a spherical tokamak is basically the same device, but squished inwards into a sphere. So it has a much narrower central column and a much lower aspect ratio. And so this is investigating tokamak physics at a much more compact scale, which has benefits of you get higher energy out for the size of reactor, which means we have a smaller footprint of our buildings and a smaller infrastructure around it. It has some drawbacks of harder plasma control and also having higher energy density in a smaller place, and things like components overheating. And so we're currently investigating with it exhaust physics. So the exhaust system of a tokamak is known as a diverter, which on jet is a little trench that goes around the bottom, which is where we extract our gases at the end of a pulse or impurities during a pulse, and it's also where we would extract our energy from. And on MasterU, we are investigating two things. So we have a double null diverter, which just means that we have one on the bottom and one on the top. And we're also investigating a Super X configuration, which basically means that the things coming out of our reactor are stretched out over a longer distance and area, which means that there is a lower heat flux for all of the components in the diverter, which means we have to pay less attention to having very high temperature capable materials. Looking forward to the future, we are currently developing the spherical tokamak for energy production, which is the UK's own demonstration power plant with a mission of delivering prototype fusion energy by 2040, and therefore showing a path to commercial viability of fusion. So we're aiming to show a capability of putting energy onto the grid by 2040. And this is currently going through a conceptual design. It's been going for several years now. We're going to lock in our conceptual design by March 2024, so in about a year from now. And one of the really exciting things about this is that we got a £220 million investment from the UK government, which means they're really starting to put their money where their mouth is for fusion energy. And as part of our conceptual design for this over the last couple of years is actually selecting a site where we're going to place the reactor, which was a fairly hotly contested competition. And we announced at the end of last year, we've selected this site in West Bertham, North Nottinghamshire, which is so in the north of the UK, which is an old coal and gas power plant, which is coming to the end of its life and being decommissioned. And we're going to repurpose the site for our fusion prototype power plant. As well as focusing on STEP, which is our UK-only project, we're also still involved in a number of international projects. So one of which is ITER, which is an international tokamak reactor, which is a basically scaled-up version of JET. If you make it bigger, you can get more energy out effectively, is one of the rules with magnetic confinement fusion. And this picture here, so it's in the south of France in Cadarache, and the site has been being built over a number of years, and they're actually getting towards having a reactor hall built now, which is really exciting. And we're also contributing work to this, as well as DEMO, which is the one step further than that scaled up version again, which is the European demonstration power plant, which is targeting 2050 and later. And so for both of these projects, the way it works is there is a central body who designates work packages for different areas of research, and any organization can bid on the work. So we still have a lot of involvement with that. So we're kind of progressing both types of tokamak alongside each other within UKAEA. And if we zoom out a little bit to the wider UK fusion community, we actually have, over the last couple of years, built up the fusion technology cluster in the UK, which aims to bring together private and public organisations from all parts of the supply chain alongside academia to deliver fusion faster. So the idea of this is we are kind of smoothing the road to fusion by working together to reduce the amount of duplicated effort in research, and also to reduce, so we've got a lot of private fusion startups in the UK, which are really good for accelerating niche and novel technologies, but can't really have the same scalability as a government facility, which has more kind of fallback money for risk. So if we work alongside each other across all areas of the supply chain, we hope to get to fusion faster. And as part of this, we actually have a number of private companies who are planning to move their next reactors to our site in Oxfordshire. So we've got First Light Fusion and General Fusion, which are both inertial confinement fusions. So unlike the NIF, where they're using lasers, the First Light Fusion is using kind of propulsion technology, so firing fuel at a target to create fusion that way, and General Fusion is using pistons to create a high pressure. And then we have Tokamak Energy, which is another spherical tokamak company. And they're building their next generation spherical tokamak with us. And they are also using this to investigate the high temperature superconducting magnets that I mentioned earlier as going to be the next step in getting longer pulse lengths for magnetic confinement fusion. And then part of this is so we have a UK fusion strategy. This has been released by the UK government with the idea of kind of leading in international fusion, science, technology, development, and commercially. So we kind of want to show that fusion is possible, practical, and commercially viable. So this is a really exciting development. They've released some papers basically stating the intent of us showing that, so we're developing STEP, which is our commercially viable power plant option, and also then developing it as the UK as an international leader in magnetic confinement fusion. And under this fusion strategy, they also prioritize getting fusion regulation. So we're now the first country to provide clarity on fusion regulation. So we wanted a regulatory system that was safe, transparent, but also innovative. So it had to have the flexibility to allow innovation and design within fusion. And part of the key milestones with this was actually the decision that our fusion regulation would be managed by the Health and Safety Executive and the Environment Agency, as opposed to through the Office of Nuclear Regulation, which means that we can operate under far less stringent conditions than nuclear fission, which gives us a little bit more flexibility for innovation. So this has been a very whistle-stop tour through a lot of different things, but if you'd like to find out any more, we have our websites. So we've got our UKAEA website and also the Eurofusion website, or you can contact us by email or find us on most social media platforms. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you both for your presentations. I see the Q&A are starting to come in hot and fast, so I will let either of you take the first one. The first one is from Cullen. So what temperatures and pressures are seen in the reactor structure materials? Is there any difference between inertial or magnetic confinement?
Would you like to take this one, Hermione?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so so for the different temperatures, so basically for fusion, you've got three main factors you need to consider. So you need the temperature, pressure, and density for the reactions to be likely to happen. The sun kind of has all of these. It's big, it's got a lot of matter, it's got a lot of energy, and to recreate it on Earth, you obviously can't recreate all three factors. So in magnetic confinement fusion, we're focusing on the higher temperatures. So we're actually going up to temperatures well above the sun produces, but we're doing it with very low densities and pressures. So for example, in JET, which is a vessel with 3-meter radius, we actually only have about 2 grams of fuel in the entire reactor. So it's a very low density plasma and therefore very low pressure, but we are putting the energy in with temperatures. I think whereas with inertial confinement fusion, the idea is more that you put a lot of energy in, but then this causes it to compress down, so you're getting more of the pressures and densities. So it's kind of focusing on the other components of the reaction.
Ryan, anything to add, or did that answer everything that you could think of?
I was wondering if the question was directed more towards the materials at the walls rather than the actual environment that the fusion is occurring in. And I don't think that there is too much of a difference. For instance, we still need to capture the energy either through neutrons or through X-rays and just stopping the charged particles. So I think that a lot of the material engineering features are going to be similar between the two schemes, between all schemes. And I think that's a good thing because we can all work together on that from many different approaches.
All right, next question. Josh asked about magnetic confinement. Is it always the case that bigger is better? What about stronger magnetic confinement enabled by advances in magnetic materials?
Okay, so the bigger is better is largely to do with actually our ratio of energy put in versus energy out. So if you scale it up, you're able to have more fuel to have the same kind of densities of plasma. And the kind of auxiliary technologies, so the technologies we're using to put energy in or to control the plasma, don't scale with the same ratio. So as you get bigger, you're able to have more fusion reaction for the same amount of energy or less energy being put in, which is why the scaling happens. With the different types of confinement, so actually that's why we're looking at the spherical tokamaks versus the conventional tokamaks, because they don't have to be as big for more energy out, which with our, so the improved confinement with different magnetic technologies means we're more able to do that on a more compact scale. But yeah, the bigger is better is more to do with the ratio of auxiliary systems scaling up at a different rate than the actual energy from the plasma.
I guess one follow-up to that was again for magnetic confinement, lots for you, Hermione. What kind of pulse lengths do we need to aim for to make it economically viable? And I think this is a big question we saw, and Ryan, you mentioned it during your presentation as well, as where do we need to get to actually make this a feasible option for the future?
So I think the distant dream originally was to move away from it being pulses and to have a continuously running reactor. But I think that's largely been ruled out based on technology. I think going forward to things like demo, they were thinking about having maybe like 10-minute pulses or even up to 2 hours. There's a lot of different numbers around. But yes, at the moment, our pulses are kind of 40 to 20 seconds, and we want to be on the order of magnitude of either minutes or hours for the different generations of reactors.
And Ryan, for lasers, is there any thought about continuous, or is it again the material limitations that just the temperatures and everything that's built up that would cause the issues?
I think this scheme that we have using lasers to drive small pellets kind of necessitates that it's going to be a not continuous fashion. We're still going to have to be producing power continuously, which is why we're going to need to be shooting, at 10 hertz, for instance, in at least the schemes that we have for taking NIF and converting that kind of idea towards fusion energy.
And in regards to the pellets, are these changed out on a regular basis? Is it automatic? And forgive me if that's an ignorant question. I come from like the fission world. Well, it's a year or 3 years that your bundles are typically in the core for. So I'm just curious about this pellet and the frequency.
Yeah, so I was showing lots of images of whole ROMs and inside of that capsules. And so that whole target package is going to need to be injected into the chamber at 10 hertz. And once it's in there and it explodes, that's it, it's gone. And so we're going to need to be having a whole production cycle of millions of these targets being built every day and filled quickly, and that are going to be robust to all sorts of different perturbations. So that's going to be a pretty significant challenge. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
No, I think when you start to look at all the issues we have, people like, oh, we reached breakthrough and we're gonna make power. It's like you start to look at some of the downstream ones, and it's a lot of work still to be done. Hermione, another question from Alberto. Has the type of power cycle been chosen for STEP, whether it's a Rankine or a Brighton cycle? Maybe it's too specific of a question.
So that is definitely outside of my area of expertise. I think that is very much still under debate. So the way STEP is, so we're using an agile design approach for STEP. So they basically thrown every concept up against the wall, and they are narrowing it down between now and next March. So yeah, that includes every type of way of getting the energy out, and also whether we're doing things like, are we generating energy directly? Are we taking it out in other ways? So everything is still very loose until next year when we actually lock down our design. So I think, yeah, not actually decided yet.
And I guess one question I kind of see a couple times here, you guys have probably heard is, fusion's always 50 years away, fusion's always 30 years away. So I guess two questions is one, what is the biggest challenge that you guys see coming up now that, we hit breakthrough, we have ITER, we have demo, we have all these commitments from the government. So what's the biggest challenge? And when do you guys actually, and I know I won't hold you to it, when do you actually see grid production of fusion energy? If you had to take a guess, and this is recorded, so we'll play it back to you at that time.
Okay. I think that fusion energy has been the energy of the future, but may not always be in the future. Wait, I take that back. Let me say that in a different way. It's always been 30 years in the future, but I don't think that's the case anymore. I actually think it really is 30 years from now that we will have that. There's been a lot of interest in developing all these different types of schemes in private industry, and not all of them are going to work, but some of them hopefully will work. And so we've demonstrated that it's possible to do it, and I'm pretty sure that ITER is going to demonstrate that it's going to be possible to do it very soon also. And so now it's just a matter of time. Once we've proven that it can be done, we're going to be very ingenious in figuring out those problems. What those problems are probably going to have to do a lot with the engineering technologies on containing the energy, extracting that energy out, and making sure that we're not destroying the target chamber or where the reaction chamber as the reactions are occurring.
Hermione, how about your perspective?
Yeah, so I think largely the same. Definitely, even over I'm still very young and very early in my career, but even over the time I've been involved in it, the kind of leaps we've made forward are really impressive compared to the overall timeline of things, which is partly down to getting the investment coming in properly now. So definitely in the UK, we've got the mixture of the government and private sector investment, which is increasing all the time. And obviously, I definitely believe that when we're working together, we're getting there faster. The UK timeline, so we've got STEP, we're going to put energy onto the grid by 2040. That won't be a full-scale power plant, but it will be just a little bit lower than that. So we're aiming to prove both energy production viability and also tritium breeding viability, which are the two main kind of issues for magnetic confinement, is getting the energy out, but also getting the fuel into the reactor. And yeah, there's definitely still a lot of challenges around kind of material science and engineering, and also general system integration that we need to figure out over the next few years. But I think the large amounts of the work has already gone in, so we are definitely getting there now.
And I've noticed a shift as well in fusion, just the amount that's being talked about, these mega collaborations and a lot of the advancements. Do you think that's mostly from just getting to the point now where it looks more viable, or do you think it's due to climate change, or is it a factor? What do you guys kind of see as the main driving factor that's really kind of pushing this forward and bringing it to attention?
I think both definitely contribute to that. Obviously, we all know by now that we have an energy crisis and we need new solutions and new technologies. And I think the thing with fusion is that it's not necessarily going to be part of the immediate solution, but it's necessary for the longer term viable picture. So we're looking at, obviously, we need our remedial measures to get our carbon down now, but we need a longer term solution. Obviously, we have things like renewable energy is great, and fission is also a really important part of the picture, but we need something else to also supplement taking out our fossil fuels, and I think fusion very nicely fills in that piece of the puzzle going forward. So I think there's definitely that, and then because of that, and because there's more pressure on both kind of private companies and the government to think more about the energy climate, they are then in turn investing a lot more in fusion, and it's looking a lot more viable.
Yeah, I echo those comments. It's mostly, I wish it was more green driven, but I think it's just dollars and or money investment, and then also oh, forgot my thought there. Mostly investment in technology development. It's really spurring all this interest and excitement.
Which I'm for, if they see the economics behind it and they don't even care about the environment, whatever gets fusion moving forward, I'm okay with. A question from Ibrahim here. Is there any likelihood of combining the different type of ways of achieving fusion, like maybe confinement with, different types of designs, or is that just not possible? You choose your design, kind of like a, fission reactor. You choose either whether it's a CANDU or a BWR, and that's what you're locked into. Maybe if you want to expand on maybe the possibility of using different types of fusion processes.
I think that Mother Nature is beautiful and cruel at the same time. Anytime you try and push something to an extreme, like making fusion energy, she's going to find a way to make sure that you can't figure it out and can't do it. So there's all sorts of instabilities that occur. And I think that's the primary reason why people have different approaches, is because they think that different aspects of each scheme is good or bad. And so combining multiple schemes usually means that you're going to take the best and worst of both of them. And in that case, that usually means that you're going to get the worst of everything. And that's not good. So I wish that were the case. And maybe some schemes out there are doing that. And certainly not everyone is sharing exactly what they're doing, since it's private companies. But it would be nice if that was possible. But I'm not sure if that is, though.
Okay, for IFE, how important are advancements in laser efficiency relative to optimizing the fusion ignition itself when it comes to extracting the net output from IFE at scale? So it'd be for Ryan.
Oh, could I share my screen again then? A second.
Yep.
Okay. You can go back to this slide. Right, so the primary cost of an IFE power plant is, at least for lasers, is going to be the actual amount of driver energy that you have. And so you can see that in the bottom right figure here, the more energy of your driver, the more expensive you're basically going to have, no matter at what hertz or what operational rate you're shooting your implosions at. So making sure that that's as small as possible is going to be very important. And there are multiple different startups that are working with different laser technologies. Some with excimer lasers, some with solid state lasers, some with not solid state lasers. I can't remember the word right now. And all of these technologies are going to be helpful. NIF was built on 1980s technology, 1980s, 1990s laser technology, and it took 10 years to build. If we were to do it again now, we could certainly have a better laser. It may be more, it would certainly be more efficient. Whether it would be more cost efficient would be kind of the design of the facility that you're trying to build, for sure. So that's an important question, and everyone's having a different approach about that. I hope that answers the question.
And
Martin, let me know if it doesn't.
Martin, if it doesn't, just angry shout in the comment box there.
All caps.
Okay, we have two more questions here, and that should bring us right to time. So, what construction challenges might we anticipate when fusion energy becomes a component of the commercial energy supply? So I'm not sure if this is asking at, will it be a supply chain issue or materials or even tritium sourcing, I know could be a potential. I'm not sure where they're shooting for, but you can interpret it as you want.
Okay, so yeah, I guess taking a flavor of those, yeah, tritium is quite a scarce resource, which when we've got the technology, we can design to breed our own within reactor, within the reactors, with the breeding blankets. But for those, we need lithium. So then we're competing with battery technology for lithium. So there's a lot of kind of material concerns to figure out down the road. And then the other side of things is also like kind of physical construction materials. So like even down to things like steels for the reactor components and subsystem components. So part of it is wanting reduced activation type steel. So actually there's a type of steel called Europa that's been being developed with fusion in mind, which is a reduced activation steel, so that we're not, because one of the benefits of fusion is that we're a lot lower on the radioactivity scale than fission, so there's fewer release concerns, but there's a lot of components of conventional steel that if they get hit by high energy neutrons become activated. So we're trying to take those out of steel, which then has knock-on effects of the structural components of the steel. So there's a lot of different, it's a whole world of materials things for construction to consider. I think part of, so with the UK's approach of having the fusion cluster is to actually develop all of those technologies alongside the fusion. So we've done, 40 plus years of just focusing on, can we make a plasma? Can we control a plasma? Can we physically make fusion happen? But actually we're moving now into the engineering challenges, which part of which is the construction of the reactors. So we're trying to mature the supply chain as we go along for everything from the bricks we make our buildings with to the actual diagnostics and components our fusion reactors are built from.
I think that was a good answer.
Okay, final question, and it is for Hermione. How do you see the concept of stellarators versus regular tokamaks?
Okay, so there's the old saying with, so for anyone that doesn't know, stellarator is you take a tokamak, which is the nice kind of donut shape thing, and you twist it up. And it's always kind of quoted as a physicist's dream and engineer's nightmare. So having moved from being I did a physics degree and now I'm moving into the engineering world, I can see both sides of it, is the diplomatic answer. So basically it means that it's easier for so magnetic confinement of the plasma in terms of a physics perspective, because plasmas kind of like to move around. So even in our donut thing, they like to move around in kind of a swirly helix path. And so the physicist idea is like, I know, let's design our reactor to follow that shape too. That makes it a lot easier to confine. Things aren't flying off in all directions. But the physical engineering challenges of making this crunched up, basically crunched up donut, kind of swirls around like a helix, is just a bit of a nightmare, both from structure and from designing the magnets. And it means that, so with tokamaks, like the jet tokamak is in 8 completely identical octants, just pieced together a bit like a chocolate orange. Whereas for a stellarator, each segment is unique because it's got a different angles of things and different dimensions. So it just becomes a lot more complicated to actually build. So there are people investigating stellarators. It's interesting technologies and it has its merits, but depends on which side of the fence you're on.
Well, with that, I think we are actually ending right perfect timing. So we had just enough time for all the questions. I want to thank you, Ryan and Hermione, for speaking and sharing some light about what's going on in the UK and North America. I also want to thank my friends over there at the UK at NI-YGN. We thought this was a great idea, was to share perspectives, both sides of the pond. And thank you all for joining us today. I did throw in the link there. We will have another joint webinar next month all about SMRs. So just like we're talking about fusion, we're talking about SMRs, all the cool stuff is out there. And that is my one closing remark to everyone is those in the fission industry, don't look down on those in the fusion industry by saying, oh, they're, super far away. And those in the fusion industry, don't look down on the fission industry. We're all nuclear professionals. We're all focusing on our own problems. We're all actually helping the environment. So yeah, we're all doing great work. Everyone should be really proud of what they're doing. But thank you all for joining us, and thank you all for a great presentation.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ronnie.